everyone! I'm doing your English video this week. We have all worked so hard through our Year 4 English objectives over the last couple of months. We have looked at inverted commas, possessive apostrophes, subordinate conjunctions, expanded noun phrases. We have looked at the skills of proofreading, dictation, and implemented our knowledge into writing fact files and poetry. This week we are going to take a look at an objective that you will delve deeper into when you're in Year 5. So this will be giving you a really big head start. We are going to take a look at relative clauses. So, what is a relative clause? Let's find out. So, let's start with a simple sentence. Matthew was playing the guitar. It's not really very interesting, is it? Why don't we add some extra information to make it more exciting? Matthew was playing the guitar. He was in his bedroom. Okay, it's better, but it's still rather simple. How could we improve this? We can make it into a complex sentence. Matthew was playing the guitar, he was in his bedroom. The second sentence adds a bit of non-vital information to the first one. So, instead of having it as two separate sentences, we can drop it in as a relative clause, just like this. Matthew, who was in his bedroom, was playing the guitar. Matthew was playing the guitar is the main clause, our main sentence. Who was in his bedroom is the relative clause that we have dropped in the middle. So, the main clause could be a sentence by itself and still make sense. Matthew was playing the guitar. The relative clause, who was in his bedroom, doesn't make sense by itself, but it adds more information to describe the noun in the sentence, which in this case is Matthew. So, it's all relative then, eh? We've replaced the pronoun in the second sentence with a relative pronoun. Can you spot it? Matthew was playing the guitar. He was in his bedroom. Matthew, who was in his bedroom, was playing the guitar. Who is the relative pronoun we use to replace people, nouns and pronouns. We will find out a little bit more about relative pronouns later on in our lesson. But for now, we're going to take a little watch of a video by the YouTubers Max and Harvey who will explain a little bit more about relative clauses to us. Beware though, it's a very catchy song, so you may be up singing and dancing throughout it, just like me.
Hey Max, guess what? What? This song is called Relative Clauses. That's so amazing. We're relatives. It's perfect. Yeah, let's all sing and dance with the people in front of us. Come on, guys. Let's all join in. Teachers too. Of words, it has a subject, it has a verb. It can be alone or in company. Maybe it's all you really need. A relative clause lets it all come out to say who or what you're writing about. Like the girl was nice, could be the girl who spoke to you was nice. Ayo, ayo, ayo. I use a relative clause to make it clear. Ayo, ayo, ayo. What I'm writing about so the world can hear. Day, when the sunshine, boy, we had a good time. Where we always play. A relative clause can help, okay. The sand, which was so soft, the man whose shoes fell off, the biggest ice cream that I've ever seen. A relative clause can sing with me. The beach by the sea is beautiful today. The shop where they sell ice creams is open by the bay. The sun that is in the sky is shining down on me. The boy who has brown hair is running to the sea. And I look at these faces again, and I hope that you can see we don't always need so many words to say just what we mean. We can take out when it's an object of the clause. We can take out. We don't need those extra words. The shells that we collected could be the shells we collected. The rocks that I picked up could be the rocks I picked chairs which we sat on, can be the chairs we sat on. It works both ways and you can always say a relative clause can help, okay? When the sun shines, boy, we had a good time. The beautiful beach where we always play. A relative clause can help, okay? The sand was so soft, but man, shoes fell off. The biggest ice cream that I've ever seen. A relative clause can save me.
So, what did we learn from Max and Harvey's video? They showed us a variety of simple sentences that they added relative clause into. This made the sentence more interesting and gave more information. The girl was nice is the simple sentence. They added in the relative clause, who spoke to you? This made the sentence, the girl who spoke to you was nice. The relative clause adds more information to describe the noun, which in this sentence is the girl. Who is the relative pronoun in this sentence? Can you spot the two commas either side of the relative clause? These are very important. The girl who spoke to you was nice. Full stop. So this sentence includes a relative clause to make it more interesting and add more information about the noun. Let's take a look at their other sentences. The beach is beautiful today. The beach, which is by the sea, is beautiful today. Full stop. The shop is open by the bay. The shop, where they sell ice creams, is open by the bay. Full stop. The sun is shining down on me. The sun, that is in the sky, is shining down on me. Full stop. The boy is running to the sea. The boy, who has brown hair, is running to the sea. Full stop. The purple bits are the relative clauses. They are adding more information to describe the noun. The beach is the noun, which is by the sea is adding more information to describe the noun, which is by the sea is the relative clause. Take a look at these three sentences, see if you can work out which part is the relative clause, what noun they are describing, and remember to check that they have the commas. Pause the video now to take a little look. Take a look at Max and Harvey's sentences again, with the relative clauses. What do you think the success criteria and steps of success would be for writing a sentence, including a relative clause? Pause the video now and have a little think, and we'll come back together and write our success criteria together. So, let's put together our success criteria for creating relative clause sentences. We know that we can add extra additional detail about a noun by adding a relative clause to a sentence, but the simple sentence still needs to make sense without the relative clause in it. So that's our first success criteria. The sentence either side of the relative clause needs to make sense if you took the relative clause out of the sentence. The relative clause needs to come after the noun it is referring to, as it is adding more information about the noun to the sentence. If the relative clause is in the middle of your simple sentence, it needs to be embedded by two commas. This means that a comma needs to come before and after the relative clause. The relative clause needs to start with a relative pronoun. We will find out a little bit about this next. So, here's our success criteria. You might want to pause the video now and copy them down into your book to refer to them throughout the rest of the lesson. We have already taken a look at the relative pronoun who. Who is the relative pronoun we use to replace people nouns or pronouns. For example, Matthew was playing the guitar, he was in his bedroom. He gets replaced with who. Matthew, who was in his bedroom, was playing the guitar. Let's take a look at some other relative pronouns. Which is the relative pronoun we use to replace object nouns. For example, apples grow on trees. They are very healthy. When we add a relative clause into this sentence, it becomes apples, which are very healthy, grow on trees. The object in this sentence is apples. They is the object pronoun, so it's changed to become which. Where is the relative pronoun we use to replace place nouns or pronouns. Mallorca is a Spanish island. We go there on holiday. This sentence is talking about a place. The place is Mallorca, the Spanish island. When we change this to include a relative clause, it becomes Mallorca, where we go on holiday, is a Spanish island. There becomes where. When is the relative pronoun we use to replace time nouns or phrases. This sentence is about a period of time. In 2008, I was 2 years old. My brother was born in 2008. When you add this as a relative clause in the sentence, it becomes in 2008 when, as it's about 2008, a time, my brother was born, I was 2 years old. Relative pronouns are used in relative clauses. Can you spot what's wrong with these new sentences? My mum is a doctor. Her name is Safira. These are the simple sentences. When it's changed to put in a relative clause, it becomes my mum, whose her name is Safira, is a doctor. I've spotted a mistake in that. Can you? What do you think the mistake is in this sentence with the relative clause? That's right, well done. The writer has left the pronoun in the new relative clause as well as adding a relative pronoun. We don't need whose and her. Her becomes whose. My mum, whose name is Safira, is a doctor. Also note that all of our relative clauses were embedded with 2 commas either side of the relative clause, and the relative clause came after the noun it was describing. The first activity I want you to have a go at is the Spot the Clause activity sheet that was attached to the parent mail that you received earlier on. This activity wants you to use 2 different colours to highlight the main clause in each sentence, the simple sentence, and the relative clause in a different colour. For example, my daughter's hair is very curly, which makes it hard to brush. Which makes it hard to brush is the relative clause. It starts with a relative pronoun and it's adding more information about the noun, which is the daughter's hair. Take it to Sarah, who is in the kitchen. Who is in the kitchen is the relative clause, so it has been highlighted in a different colour. Snow, which is very cold, can be used to make snowmen. Which is very cold is the relative clause, which is adding more information to describe the noun, which is snow. You may notice here that we have relative clauses embedded, like we have just looked at, and we also have some relative clauses that go at the end of a sentence. So you need to read the whole sentence really carefully to find out where the relative clause is. If you do not have a printer to print the sheet, do not worry. You can just copy each sentence down in your book and underline, highlight, or even write the relative clause in a different colour to the main clause of the sentence. Have a go now and let us know how you get on. Take a look at the answers here. I have underlined in black the relative clause. Hopefully you managed to find them in each sentence. Second activity, which I want you to have a little go at now, is called Match the Clause. Again, this sheet was attached to the parent mail that you received. If you do not have a printer, don't worry, because just like the previous activity, you can just copy the main clauses and correct relative clauses together and write them down on your paper or in your workbook. So for this activity, the sentences have all been mixed up. We have the main clauses down one side and the relative clauses down the other. However, as you can see, the main clause and the relative clause do not match. I go swimming at 7 a.m, whose hair curls in the same way. That doesn't make sense as a sentence, so you've got to find out which relative clause matches the main clause here. For example, my favourite food is pizza, which is made from snow, does not make any sense. It would not be very nice to eat a pizza made from snow. However, my favourite food is pizza, which originates from Italy, does make sense. You may notice here that all our relative clauses are coming at the end of a sentence. Just like we saw in the previous activity, this is one way that you can write a relative clause in a sentence. So, have a little go at this activity now and let us know how you get on. Here is our check for our Match the Clause activity. I have drawn lines between the main clause and the relative clause that it matches to. Take a look and see if you managed to match them correctly. From our first two activities, we have learnt that the relative clause comes after the noun to add more information to the sentence. We have seen a sentence where the main clause is followed by a relative clause to end the sentence, and where a relative clause is embedded or dropped in to the middle of a sentence after the noun to add more information. Our main activity today is going to focus on the embedded relative clause, where it is dropped into the middle of a main clause. We need to remember our success criteria for this type of relative clause, using commas, a relative pronoun, and ensuring the main clause still makes sense by itself. We are going to be reading information about Egyptian gods and goddesses and using our retrieval and summarising Viper skills to write relative clause sentences about gods and goddesses. As we are writing about gods and goddesses who are people, we are going to be using the relative pronoun who. This is going to be used to add more information about the gods and goddesses we are describing.
You may be wondering why a cheeseburger has just popped up on your screen. Today, we are going to think about a relative clause sentence as a cheeseburger. The relative clause is the juicy meat and cheese that fills the middle of the bun. The bun around the juicy filling is the main clause. You could just eat the burger bun. It would still be a burger, but it wouldn't be very interesting or exciting to eat. However, if you add the meat and cheese and the fillings inside, yum yum, that is so much better. The main clause, like the bun, is okay alone, it makes sense. But if you add the meat inside, it's much more exciting and much more interesting. Here we have our first piece of information about the Egyptian god Amun. It said, Amun, who was a very important god, created all things. However, there are not many stories or pictures of him as he was invisible. I've read that piece of information and I've retrieved the important fact from it, which is a relative clause. Amun, who was a very important god, created all things. Who was a very important god is the relative clause, so I've put it in the middle of our burger as the juicy filling. Amun and created all things is the main clause, that's the bun that goes around the juicy filling, the relative clause. The main clause, Amun created all things, could make sense on its own as a sentence. However, if you add in a relative clause, it tells you some more information about Amun, who is the noun. It follows with the relative pronoun who, as we are describing a person, and it is embedded by 2 commas either side. Amun, who was a very important god, created all things. Take a look at this next piece of information about the Egyptian goddess Hathor. Hathor was the goddess of love, music, and dance. The goddess, who looked after all women in life and death, sometimes took the form of a cow. Can you work out where the relative clause is in this sentence? What would the main clause be and what would the relative clause be? Pause the video now to have a go. Okay, let's have a quick look together, a quick check. The goddess, who looked after all women in life and death, sometimes took the form of a cow. That is our relative clause sentence. Our relative clause is the juicy burger in the middle, followed by the main clause. The goddess sometimes took the form of a cow. That makes sense by itself, but we've added in some extra information using the relative pronoun who to describe the goddess, who looked after all women in life and death. Let's take a look at this next one. Here we've got a piece of information about the gods and goddesses Nut and Geb. In this piece of information, we can retrieve 2 relative clause sentences to fill up our burgers. Pause the video now to have a look, see if you can find them in the text. Okay, let's have a little check together of these relative clause sentences. For our first sentence, the main clause begins with nut, followed by a comma, and then the relative clause. Who was the goddess of the sky, comma, was the wife of Geb, full stop. Who is the relative clause which is adding extra information to describe the noun nut. It was believed that Nut, who had a blue body covered in stars, made earthquakes when she laughed. Again, the relative pronoun who is being used to give extra information to describe what Nut looks like. She had a blue body covered in stars.
So, we have had a go at finding relative clause sentences in a text. Now we're going to have a go at reading a piece of text and retrieving extra information to add in as a relative clause. I will show you a my turn first, and then you can have a go at some yourselves. So, here is my cheeseburger. My main clause and sentence that I've already written is Ra was the most important god. If I add this to my cheeseburger, I'm going to put Ra at the top as the top juicy bun. And at the bottom, I'm going to put was the most important god. With a full stop at the end. Now, I know if I'm going to put a relative clause in the middle, I need to follow the first part of the main clause with a comma. The next comma will go at the end of my relative clause. Now I'm going to read you a piece of text about the god Ra. I'm then going to add in extra information about the god Ra as a relative clause to the middle of the main clause. Name Ra, god of the sun and lord of the earth. Ra was the most important god to all the Egyptians. He is shown to have the body of a human and the head of a falcon. Above his head sits a sun disk with a cobra wrapped around it. It was believed that he was swallowed by Nut, the sky goddess, every night and born again in the morning. The Egyptians also believed that Ra travelled through the underworld at night, where he appeared as a man with the head of a ram. Okay, so from that we found out that Ra is shown to have the body of a human and the head of a falcon. Above his head there is a sun disk with a cobra wrapped around it, and it also said that he sometimes appeared with the head of a ram. I think I'm going to add in some extra information to describe what Ra looks like. So, as my relative clause, I'm going to write who to start with. I've used who because our noun that we are describing is a person, Ra, the god. And then I'm going to write Ra, who has the head of a falcon, who has the head of a falcon, remembering to put my comma at the end of the relative clause, was the most important god. So, Ra was the most important god has become Ra, who has the head of a falcon, was the most important god. We've added extra information there to describe Ra the god, to describe what he looks like. Now it's your turn. I have sent you a sheet with lots of information about different gods and goddesses that you can read. Remember, as you're reading, to use your retrieval, guided reading Viper skills, and also your summarising guided reading Viper skills. Another document contains lots of cheeseburgers which have a main clause about each god or goddess on it. Read the information about the gods and goddess and then add in a relative clause from what you have retrieved and summarised from the text. You can print the sheet out and write on the sheet with the cheeseburgers on, or you can draw the cheeseburger in your book, just like I've done here, or you could just simply write the sentence with the relative clause embedded in the middle in your books. Here is the writing sheet that was attached to the parent mail. There are a selection of sentences. Your job is to add in a relative clause as the juicy filling to give some extra information to the sentence. You can read the attached information sheets, which I will show you next, on the gods and goddesses to find the information you need for your relative clause. Remember to follow the steps to success that we generated together earlier to write your relative clause in the middle of the sentence. Remember to use the correct relative pronoun, thinking about what type of noun we are describing, and remember to add in the correct punctuation around your relative clause to punctuate the sentence correctly. Here is the information page on the Egyptian gods and goddesses for you to retrieve your information from to write your relative clause sentences. You can read the information on the gods and you can look at the pictures of them if you want to add in some extra information to describe what they look like as your relative clause. Have a go now writing your own sentences. Send in anything you do to show your teachers how hard you have been working. For our final activity today, I want you to have a go at creating your own sentences with relative clauses in them. To do this, you can head to readon.myon.co.uk and find the Ancient Egyptian Gods and Goddesses book. Here is the link if you need to copy it directly into your browser. Pause the video now to copy it down. Once you have found the book, click Start the Book to start reading. You can use the arrows to move the book along and find out lots of different information all about the Egyptian gods and goddesses. When it gets to chapter 4, there are different pages on each of the gods and goddesses. Some of them we've already looked at today, some of them are new, so they might be interesting ones to start with. I'm going to read to you now about the goddess Bastet. Listen carefully, and then I will write my own relative clause sentence for you on the goddess Bastet, and then you can have a go using the book to write some of your own ones.
Chapter 9. Bastet. Pronunciation. Bastet. Title: Goddess of Cats, Fire, the Moon, Pregnancy, and Homes. Appearance: Woman with the head of a cat, sometimes lioness. Related to Ra, father, Mahi's child. Also called Bast. Bastet was the goddess of home and pregnancy. She was thought to bring good fortune and happiness. Egyptians worshipped her in times of need or when a child was born. She was often called upon for help and showed her gentle side in times of need. However, Bastet had a mean streak. She was a fierce fighter. She attacked her enemies with such aggression they could rarely stop her. Her feisty side was so well known that even the pharaohs turned to her. They often asked her to protect them in battle.
So, after reading that, we have found out lots of information about the goddess Bastet. As on my turn, I'm going to write a couple of sentences that contain a relative clause now. I'm thinking about the success criteria we wrote earlier to help me, remembering my punctuation, relative pronouns, remembering that my main clause needs to make sense without the relative clause in it, and remembering that the relative clause is going to be popped in the middle of our sentence. So, thinking about what we just read, I remember it said that the goddess Bastet was quite a fierce fighter who was feared by many, but she also had quite a mean streak. So, if I'm thinking of my main clause is going to be Bastet was a fierce fighter. I'm going to pop my relative clause in the middle about her mean streak. That's adding more information, creating a picture in your head about what Bastet might have been like as a fighter. So I'm going to start my sentence with Bastet. Capital letter for the name. Now, my relative clause is going to come next, so I need to remember to open up with a comma. So Bastet. Now, as we're describing a person noun, we need to use the relative pronoun who. So Bastet, who had a mean streak. That's my relative clause. So I'm going to finish my relative clause with a comma and then carry on with my main clause. Was a fierce fighter. Full stop. Bastet, who had a mean streak, was a fierce fighter. So there's my sentence with my relative clause in the middle. So we've started this sentence with the name of the goddess, Bastet. I'm going to start my next sentence with the goddess with the head of a cat, as that's what Bastet looked like. So I need a big capital letter to start my sentence. The Now, for my relative clause, I'm still going to use the relative pronoun who. So I'm going to have a comma and I'm going to put who. I'm still, even though I haven't used the name of the goddess, the name of the person, I'm still talking about a person, a goddess, the goddess with the head of a cat. I want to add more information about the noun, the goddess Bastet. So the goddess with the head of a cat who, I'm thinking about what she looked like, the picture of her in the book. She had a long yellow dress. That's a nice expanded noun phrase that I'm going to pop in there as well. The goddess with the head of a cat who had a long yellow dress. That's the end of my relative clause, so I need to put a comma. The goddess with the head of a cat who had a long yellow dress, comma. I'm going to talk about what they believe she would bring to them. They believe she would bring good fortune and happiness, so I'm going to write was thought to bring good fortune and happiness. Was thought to bring good fortune and happiness. And finishing with a full stop. Let's just go through and check we've got everything in both of our sentences from our success criteria. So I've got my relative clause, which has gone in the middle of my main clause. I've put a relative pronoun at the beginning of my relative clause. I've put a comma before the relative clause after the noun here, and at the end of the relative clause, I've got my capital letter and full stop like I would have in any sentence. And the most important bit is the main clause has got to make sense by itself as well. Bastet was a fierce fighter. That makes sense, but we add in the relative clause, the juicy middle bit of our burger. Bastet, who had a mean streak, was a fierce fighter. Okay, now it's your turn. Using the book on ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, see if you can write your own sentences with relative clauses. Send in anything you write down so we can have a little look at what you've got up to at home. I hope you get on well, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.